Jessica Sullivan was 41, beautiful the way winter is beautiful, sharp, untouchable, and quietly brutal. Everyone at Sullivan and Creed Advertising in downtown Chicago called her the Ice Queen behind her back and Miss Sullivan to her face, pronouncing the MS like they were handling live ammunition. She had built the agency from a 12-person shop to a $200 million powerhouse in 12 years, mostly by never showing a crack. On the night of the company holiday party at the Basement, a slick underground club on Wacker Drive, Jessica wore a black silk dress that cost more than most of her employees made in a month and drank 3 espresso martinis in under an hour because the board had just rejected her biggest pitch of the decade. Ryan Mitchell, 34, senior art director, divorced 2 years, still paying alimony on a house he no longer lived in, had only come because his team begged him. He was leaning against the bar watching the snow fall past the street-level windows when he saw Jessica slip away from the crowd, one hand pressed to her stomach, face suddenly gray. Ryan knew that shade of gray. His little sister used to turn it right before chemo. Without thinking, he followed her down the narrow hallway past the kitchens, past the coat check, to the private unisex restroom marked staff only. The door didn't lock properly. He heard the retching before he reached for the handle. When he pushed it open, Jessica was on her knees in front of the toilet, silk dress pulled around her like spilled oil, vomiting espresso martinis and humiliation in equal measure. For 1 second, their eyes met in the mirror, hers bloodshot and terrified, his wide and helpless. And then she turned away, waving one shaking hand as if she could erase him from existence. Ryan did the only thing he could think of. He stepped inside, closed the door with his foot, knelt behind her, gathered her thick auburn hair in both hands the way he used to do for his sister, and held it back while she emptied her stomach. When the spasms finally stopped, she stayed bent over the bowl, forehead against the cool porcelain, breathing like someone who had forgotten how lungs worked. Ryan grabbed a stack of brown paper towels, wet them under the faucet, and wiped her mouth with the same gentleness he once used on a 6-year-old who weighed 42 pounds soaking wet. Jessica didn't speak. She couldn't. Ryan helped her stand, steadied her against the sink, found mouthwash in the cabinet, someone always left it for the drunk executives, and watched her rinse and spit until the sour taste was gone. Only then did she look at him. Really look. And Ryan saw something he never expected. Gratitude so raw it looked like fear. "If you ever tell anyone," she whispered, voice shredded, "I will end you." Ryan nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." She laughed then, a cracked sound that turned into a sob she immediately swallowed. She straightened her spine, smoothed the dress, and walked out like nothing had happened. Ryan stayed behind to clean the toilet with more paper towels and the industrial cleaner under the sink, because leaving it for the night staff felt wrong. 2 days later, Monday morning, an envelope appeared on Ryan's desk while he was grabbing coffee. Inside was a promotion letter, Associate Creative Director, effective immediately. 28% raise, corner office on 23. Taped to the letter was a single red lipstick kiss mark, perfect and deliberate, the exact shade Jessica had worn Saturday night. Ryan's hands shook so hard he almost dropped it. At 10:17 a.m., his inbox pinged with a calendar invite titled, "My Office, Now-JS." He walked the long hallway, feeling every eye in the bullpen follow him. When he stepped into her corner suite overlooking the river, Jessica was standing at the window, city glittering behind her like broken glass. She didn't turn around, closed the door. He did. She finally faced him, arms folded tight. She said, "You know what nobody in this building knows, that I'm human, that I get sick, that I lose, and now you hold that over me." Ryan started to speak, but she lifted one finger and he shut up. "So here's the deal, Ryan Mitchell. You saw me weak. Fine. Now you don't get to walk away and keep that power. You become the strength that keeps me from ever being that weak again. You work directly for me. You travel with me. You sit in every meeting I sit in. You carry my secrets, and I carry your career. We are bound now. Do you understand?" Ryan's heart was hammering so loud he was sure she heard it. He thought of his sister who died at 29, of the alimony that kept him broke, of the nights he fell asleep on the couch because the bed still smelled like his ex-wife. He thought of Jessica on her knees in a $5,000 dress, shaking. "Yes, ma'am," he said again. Something flickered across her face, relief maybe, terror, and then it was gone. "Good then," she said. "Then start by calling me Jessica when we're alone." She paused.
And lose the ma'am makes me feel ancient. That was the beginning.
The first month after the promotion was a strange, slow-burning dream. Ryan moved into the corner office 2 doors down from Jessica's, and suddenly his days were built around her rhythm. 5:45 a.m. alarm so he could review decks before she arrived at 6:30 sharp. Black coffee, no sugar waiting on her desk exactly 4 minutes before she walked him wearing heels that could slice bread. The two of them riding the elevator in silence while the rest of Chicago still slept. She never thanked him for the coffee, but she always drank it. They flew to New York, LA, Austin, Miami, always first class, always separate hotel rooms, always late-night room service dinners in her suite because she hated eating alone but would rather die than admit it. In those quiet hours after the clients left and the laptops closed, the armor started coming off in pieces. One night in a suite overlooking Central Park, she kicked off her Louboutins, curled her feet under her on the sofa, and asked about the faint white scar on his left wrist. Ryan rolled the sleeve and told her the truth. His little sister Emily, leukemia at 19, bone marrow transplant at 23, dead at 29 anyway, how he used to cut himself in the hospital parking lot because physical pain was easier than watching her fade. Jessica listened without moving, eyes fixed on the scar like it was a map. When he finished, she reached out, not to touch him, just hovered her fingertips an inch above the mark, then pulled back and poured them both more wine. 3 nights later in Miami, after they won the Coca-Cola account against 4 bigger agencies, she got drunk on champagne on the balcony and told him why she never had children. At 27, fresh out of Wharton, she'd been pregnant by a married professor who paid for the abortion and then recommended her for her first job out of guilt. She had never told another soul. Ryan didn't offer comfort. He simply moved his chair closer so their shoulders touched, and they watched the ocean until sunrise. By March, they were finishing each other's sentences in client meetings, reading each other's moods across conference tables, protecting each other without discussion. The office whispered about the Ice Queen's new favorite, but nobody dared say it loud because Jessica would freeze them with one look, and Ryan had quietly become the best art director the agency had ever had. Then came April, and the phone call that changed everything. Ryan was in the middle of sketching storyboards when his phone buzzed with a number from his hometown, Rockford, Illinois. His mother's voice was paper thin. "It's your father, honey. Massive stroke. They don't think he's going to wake up." Ryan was on the 410 Metra out of Union Station before he even told Jessica he was leaving. He spent 6 days at Rockford Memorial watching machines breathe for the man who taught him how to throw a curveball and how to change oil, but never once said, "I love you." On the 7th morning, the doctor pulled the plug, and Ryan held his mother while she screamed into his chest like a wounded animal. He called Jessica from the hospital parking lot, voice flat with exhaustion. "Take all the time you need," she said, and it sounded like she meant it. 2 weeks later, he came back to Chicago 20 pounds lighter and carrying a box of his father's things, including a stack of unopened letters addressed to Ryan in a woman's handwriting he didn't recognize. That night, Jessica ordered Italian from Ricardo's and showed up at his Wicker Park apartment unannounced with a bottle of Barolo and a quiet, "You don't have to be alone tonight." They ate on the floor because the table was covered in sympathy cards, and when Ryan finally opened the first letter and read the words, "I'm sorry I left you when you were 3. I was 17 and terrified. Your father said he'd raise you better without me." He started shaking so hard Jessica had to take the paper from his hands. There were 42 letters, one for every birthday he never knew his real mother was writing from a trailer park in Pensacola, Florida. The last one, dated 3 months earlier, ended with, "I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. I don't have long. If you ever want to hate me in person, I understand." Ryan looked at Jessica across the pizza box and said, "I think I have to go to Florida." She didn't hesitate. "Then I'm coming with you." They flew to Pensacola the next day on the company jet because Jessica said bereavement shouldn't mean Spirit Airlines' middle seat. The woman who opened the door of the single-wide trailer was a fragile ghost with Ryan's hazel eyes and cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Her name was Lisa Grant, and she weighed maybe 90 pounds and smelled like hospital soap. The first thing she said when she saw Ryan was, "You look just like your daddy when he smiled." And then she cried so hard she threw up blood into a plastic basin. Jessica, who had never changed a diaper or held a stranger's hand, sat on the sagging couch and held Lisa upright while Ryan called hospice. They stayed 4 days. Ryan learned his father had lied for 31 years, told everyone Lisa was a junkie who abandoned them, when really she was a scared teenager whose parents forced her to sign away rights. Jessica paid for private nurses out of her own pocket and never told Ryan until months later. On the last night Lisa was lucid, she gripped Ryan's hand with surprising strength and whispered,
Tell your lady boss she's the daughter I never got to raise right. Don't let her work herself to death like I did, living with regret." Ryan promised. Lisa died at 3:14 a.m., with Ryan on one side and Jessica on the other. They flew home in silence, both carrying someone else's ghosts. Back in Chicago, the agency was falling apart without them. A major client threatening to leave, 2 senior creatives quitting, the board demanding Jessica's head. She walked into the office like a hurricane, fired 3 vice presidents before lunch, and by Friday had saved the company she almost lost while holding a dying woman's hand in Florida. That night, she showed up at Ryan's apartment again, this time soaked from the rain, mascara running in deliberate streaks. She didn't speak, just pushed him against the hallway wall and kissed him like she was drowning and he was oxygen. It wasn't gentle. It tasted like grief and gin and 8 months of pretending they already weren't in love. They didn't make it to the bedroom. Clothes came off in the living room, on the couch, against the bookshelf where his father's old baseball trophies crashed to the floor. Later, tangled in sheets and each other, Jessica traced the scar on his wrist and said, "I'm terrified of needing you this much." Ryan kissed the top of her head and answered, "Good. Be terrified. I'm not going anywhere." For 6 weeks they were careful. Separate cabs in the morning, no touching in the office, stolen nights when the city was asleep. Then came the morning Jessica threw up in her private bathroom at work and realized her period was 3 weeks late. She sat on the marble floor staring at the positive test she'd bought at the Duane Reade on Michigan Avenue and felt every wall she'd ever built crumble at once. She was 41, perimenopausal according to her doctor, told years ago it would probably never happen, and now here was this tiny plus sign rewriting her entire life. She walked into Ryan's office, closed the door, locked it, and handed him the test without a word. Ryan looked at it, looked at her, and started crying, ugly, shoulder-shaking sobs because Emily never got to be a mother and Lisa never got to raise her son, and now the universe was handing him this miracle wrapped in the woman he loved more than breathing. Jessica stood frozen, waiting for him to be scared, to run, to say it was impossible. Instead, he dropped to his knees right there on the carpet, pressed his face to her still flat stomach and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be part of this." That was Tuesday. On Friday, the board called an emergency meeting. Someone had sent anonymous photos. Jessica and Ryan leaving his apartment at 5:47 a.m., his hand on the small of her back. Them holding hands in the first-class lounge at O'Hare. A blurry shot through the trailer window in Pensacola of Jessica holding Lisa's hand while Ryan slept on the other side. The subject line of the email to all 14 board members read, "CEO fraternization and misuse of company assets." Jessica walked into the boardroom alone because Ryan was home with a 102-degree fever from sheer exhaustion. They gave her an ultimatum: end the relationship and fire Ryan immediately or resign by Monday. She looked each of them in the eye, men who golfed with her father before he died, men who toasted her when she made her first $1 million, and said, "I choose him and the baby. I'll be gone by 5. She was packing her office when Ryan burst in, still feverish, eyes wild. "What the hell are you doing?" he demanded. "I heard security talking. Jess, you can't give up everything you built for—" She cut him off by kissing him hard enough to taste blood. "I'm not giving up anything," she said against his mouth. "I'm choosing the only thing that ever mattered." They left the building together, hand in hand, while the entire 23rd floor watched in stunned silence. That night, Jessica miscarried. She woke Ryan at 2 a.m. doubled over, blood soaking the sheets, screaming his name like a prayer and a curse. At Northwestern Memorial, the ultrasound showed no heartbeat. 8 weeks and 4 days, gone as quietly as it came. The doctor called it bad luck. Jessica called it punishment. For 3 days, she wouldn't let Ryan touch her, wouldn't speak, just stared at the wall in their bedroom while he brought soup she didn't eat and held ice packs to her cramps because she refused the pain pills. On the 4th morning, Ryan found her on the bathroom floor, again, same position as the club restroom a lifetime ago. Only this time, she was sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. He picked her up, carried her to the shower, turned it on scalding, and held her under the water fully clothed until the sobs turned to hiccups and the water ran cold. When they finally spoke, she said, "I can't be your weakness anymore. I destroy everything I love."
Ryan dried her hair with the towel like she was made of glass and answered, "Then let me be yours a little longer, because I'm still standing." The first month after the miscarriage, they lived like ghosts in Ryan's Wicker Park two-bedroom, the one with the creaky radiator and the neighbor who played saxophone at 2 in the morning. Jessica slept 14 hours a day and woke up crying. Ryan stopped sleeping entirely and lost another 12 pounds because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ultrasound screen go gray. They didn't talk about the agency, didn't answer calls, didn't open mail, just existed inside a silence so thick it felt like drowning. On the 32nd day, Jessica walked into the kitchen at dawn, wearing Ryan's old Northwestern hoodie that hung to her knees and said, "I need to go home." Ryan thought she meant her penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, the one she hadn't stepped foot in since the board meeting, but she shook her head and clarified, "No, home, home. Galena. I haven't been back since the funeral." Ryan knew what funeral she meant, her father's, 10 years earlier, the day she became CEO at 31 and swore she'd never return to the small town that still had her high school track photo in the local diner. They drove west on I-90 in Ryan's beat-up Subaru because Jessica said she didn't want to feel rich for once. The house on Deer Path Lane hadn't changed. White clapboard, black shutters, wraparound porch where her father used to drink iced tea and grade papers. Inside smelled exactly the same, lemon polish and old books, and Jessica stood in the foyer clutching the banister like it might disappear. Upstairs in her childhood bedroom, she opened the closet and pulled out a shoebox wrapped in faded blue ribbon. Inside were hundreds of letters in her own teenage handwriting, all addressed to Mom and marked "Return to Sender" in red ink. Ryan sat on the twin bed with the faded American flag comforter while Jessica read one aloud, voice cracking. "Dear Mom, I got straight A's again. Dad says I'm just like you. I wish you'd come see for yourself. Love, Jessie, age 14. There were letters for every milestone, state track championship, valedictorian speech, Wharton acceptance, until the final one dated the week her father died. I'm coming to New York to find you, whether you like it or not. You don't get to leave."
Twice. Jessica looked up, tears cutting clean tracks through 10-year-old dust on her cheeks. "She left when I was 6. Said she was going to the city to become somebody. Dad raised me alone and never said a bad word about her. I thought she was dead to us. Turns out she just didn't want us." Ryan took the box, set it aside, and pulled Jessica into his lap like she weighed nothing. "We're going to New York," he said simply. "We're ending this." They found Eleanor Sullivan alive and thriving in a brownstone on the Upper East Side, remarried to a hedge fund guy, 2 perfect stepdaughters at Yale, charity galas every weekend. When Jessica rang the bell wearing jeans and no makeup, Eleanor opened the door in cashmere and pearls and went white as bone. The conversation lasted exactly 11 minutes. Eleanor offered coffee, Jessica declined. Ryan stood behind her like a silent bodyguard, while Jessica laid the shoebox on the marble console and said, "You threw these away. I'm not here for an apology. I'm here to tell you I became somebody without you. And I'm having a baby," she lied smoothly, the loss still too raw to admit. "And you will never meet him or her because some people don't deserve second chances." Then she walked out. In the cab back to Midtown, Jessica finally cried for the 6-year-old who waited on that porch every day for a mother who never came back. Ryan held her the whole ride and didn't say everything would be okay, because some things never are. They just become something you carry. Back in Chicago, they started over from zero. Jessica had walked away with nothing but her reputation. The non-compete meant she couldn't work in advertising for 2 years. Ryan's savings were gone from alimony and funerals. They sold the Subaru, moved into a 1-bedroom in Logan Square above a Puerto Rican bakery that smelled like heaven at 5 a.m., and took whatever jobs paid rent. Ryan freelancing logos for startups, Jessica teaching night classes at the School of the Art Institute, because she still knew more about branding than anyone in the city. 6 months later, on a random Tuesday in October, Jessica threw up in the tiny bathroom again. This time the test showed 2 pink lines that didn't disappear. She was 42, terrified and laughing through tears when she showed Ryan. He dropped the spatula, he was making pancakes, and sank to the linoleum floor, whispering, "Thank you, thank you, thank you," like a prayer. The pregnancy was brutal. Hyperemesis that put her back in the hospital twice, gestational diabetes, blood pressure scares. Ryan learned to give heparin shots in her belly, carried barf bags in every coat pocket, and never once complained. At 7 months, Jessica's doctor put her on bed rest, and Ryan took leave from his new junior copywriter job at a tiny agency in River North. They lived on savings and hope and the kindness of neighbors who brought tamales and checked on them. One night at 2 a.m., contractions started early. Ryan drove through a March ice storm to Rush Medical Center, doing 80 on Lakeshore Drive while Jessica screamed in the passenger seat and squeezed his hand so hard she left bruises for weeks. The baby came out blue and not breathing. The NICU team worked for 9 minutes that felt like 9 years. Then a thin, angry cry filled the delivery room, and Ryan sobbed so hard the nurse had to hold him up. They named her Emily Lisa Sullivan Mitchell, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect tiny fingers wrapped around Ryan's thumb from the first second. Jessica held her daughter against her chest and looked at Ryan across the mountain of wires and monitors and said, voice raw, "You were my strength when I had none. Now look what we built." 2 years later, Sullivan and Creed's biggest rival went bankrupt, and the assets came up for fire sale purchase. Jessica, who had spent every spare minute of maternity leave writing a new business plan on the back of diaper box cardboard, walked into a bank with a 2-year-old on her hip and a folder of freelance awards and somehow convinced them to loan her $38 million. She bought the bankrupt agency, merged it with her old contacts, and reopened 6 months later as Sullivan Mitchell Creative. New name, new soul, same ruthless excellence, but with flex hours, unlimited PTO, and a daycare on the 5th floor because she refused to make any other mother choose between ambition and her children. Ryan became Chief Creative Officer because nobody else could translate her vision into images that made grown men cry in focus groups. On the first anniversary of reopening, they threw a party on the rooftop overlooking the river. Jessica wore the same black silk dress from that night at the basement, only now it had a faint formula stain on the hem and she didn't care. She pulled Ryan into the same private restroom, new location, same industrial cleaner smell, and kissed him until they were both breathless. "Remember when you cleaned up my vomit and I threatened to end you?" She laughed against his mouth. Ryan grinned, the same crooked smile that had melted her the first time. "Best night of my life. Started everything." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a crisp white envelope. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper with the new company letterhead and one line in her handwriting. "Lifetime contract. You're stuck with me forever. J." At the bottom was a perfect red lipstick kiss, same shade as always. Ryan tucked it into his inside pocket next to his heart and whispered, "Good, because I never learned how to leave." Years later, when Emily was 8 and her little brother Michael was 5, the family took a trip back to Galena. They stood on that same porch while the kids chased fireflies in the yard. Jessica slipped her hand into Ryan's and said quietly, "I used to think strength was never breaking. You taught me it's breaking and letting someone hold the pieces." Ryan kissed her temple and answered, "And you taught me that love isn't weakness. It's the only thing that makes any of it worth surviving." Behind them, the screen door creaked, and Emily yelled, "Mom, Dad, come quick, Michael caught one." They turned together, two people who had seen each other at their absolute worst, on bathroom floors, in hospital beds, holding dying parents and dead dreams, and chose every single day after to stay. The firefly glowed between Michael's cupped hands like a tiny star, and Jessica looked at Ryan and knew, without a single doubt, that every tear, every loss, every terrifying leap had led them exactly here, whole, scarred, and finally strong.